Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to day 2 of the program. Again, like day 1, I just want to invite everybody to go into gallery view and wave to each other so that we can ground ourselves in who's here. Just for 1 second, if you want to turn your video on, if you're comfortable, just give it a wave. Wow, so amazing. So many parts of the world. I know Hong Kong. I know we have Mexico City. We have Paris. Okay. All right, moving back to speaker view. Thank you for doing that. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Afield, it's an international network of cultural change makers. And the Afield studies, which this is one part of, is our co-learning programs led by different members of the network on different topics that are of interest to the network and I guess the community beyond the network as well as a whole. So I won't repeat what I said on day 1, because if you're interested, you can, that's like sort of the longer introduction to the program, but I encourage you to rewatch it. It's back on YouTube. At one point we can include it in the chat. But what I'll do is just do a quick summary of what was said on day 1 so that we can ground ourselves and for the speakers of today's program. So on Monday, we had speakers Amanda de Sa Pachao from Brasilia, Leroy F. Moore Jr. from LA, and Sophie Chung, who is speaking from London, but about Hong Kong. Amanda started off with an image of a circle of normativity. Whatever's inside is normative, and outside of it is the abnormal. The idea of what is inappropriate is constructed by the institutions that uphold this notion of appropriateness. So there is no absolute, everything is a social construct. Institutions create docility, schools, prisons, asylums, and hospitals. And I know today we are actually going to be speaking about 2 forms of this, which is extremely, has formulated the way that we act in society every day. Colonizers create docile bodies so that they can do whatever they want with them. But it is an attack on human diversity. She unpacks the theory of executive functions, our human capacity to do, which is our human capacity to do tasks, the neurological and within our brain functions, and how do we actually understand how we break down tasks in our brains. And she presents how institutions like schools put neurodivergent people at a disadvantage. Sorry, I need water for a second. Sorry.
I'd like to remind Chantal and our speakers today to speak slowly.
I'm so nervous to take up too much time, but I also think it's really important. But okay, I'll speak slowly. She concludes with needing to move away from the paradigm of normality in society. Leroy, whose Crip Hop remix we just heard, Leave the Ramp Down, so good, we were playing when we started the Zoom, is working on a PhD in linguistic anthropology. Language is important to Crip Hop. Language is shaped by institutions, but most of the time it is oppressive and hurtful. Crip Hop, which is where he's working both on it academically, but also, as you heard, he actually creates music around it, flips language and flips it to society. He connects linguistic techniques within hip hop to roots of slavery and the disabled. He spoke of the process of becoming politically and culturally disabled and the place of Crip Hop within the politic. Then he shared information about his new institutions of Crip Hop, from UCLA to his own envisioning of a Crip Hop center that will teach Black and disabled communities Crip Hop politics, but also connected to Afro-Crip communities around the world. And finally, Sophie looks at mental conditions from a legal anthropological framework. She shares that mental incapacitation, which is a term still used, is not human nature, but is a legal judgment. In 2014, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities published principles that includes everyone must have equal recognition before the law. In Hong Kong, alongside many parts of the world, the diagnosis of mental incapacitation opposes this principle. Mental incapacitation is the justification for denying people their legal capacity and agency. And just to be clear, mental incapacitation is the legal term still used in many places, post-colonial places, because it was used as a in UK for the longest time. Her community programs now look at the different ways that people with mental conditions unpack the legal terminology and its impact on them. So these are some of the themes, and they'll come up also today. But today I want to first say thank you to Lluvia Nisaye and Smita Chakraburtty, who are joining us to speak about different physical and digital spaces that implicate and have potential to disarm ableist regimes. If you have any questions along the way, you can directly place them into the chat box, either directly to me or just into the general chat box to start the conversation, and we will collect the questions for the Q&A at the end. So a brief introduction to Yuvia. Born and raised in Tenochtitlan, Mexico, by her grandmother Amparito, Yuvia comes from a long matriarchal dynasty of strong women from Juchitán, I want to say, Juchitán, Oaxaca. Her practice combines her knowledge in political science, teaching, history, humor, coding and technology design, culinary history, and meme culture. Currently, they're focusing on crafting and facilitating creative courses and doing user experience research with elders and rural communities across Turtle Island. Yuvia truly believes in the power of translating obfuscated and overcomplicated knowledge and digital experiences to folks that otherwise would find themselves excluded. Thank you very much, and over to you, Yuvia.
Thank you. Okay, cool. Can you folks see my screen? A lovely Zoom question. Okay, lovely. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about healing our relationship with education. I was wondering how I could title this, because I feel like it's more like storytelling and I touch into different topics. So anyway, okay, so let's do a quick exercise at the beginning. So I'm gonna ask you folks to close your eyes. Let's just relax for a minute, close your eyes. And now imagine a person with a disability. And now hold on to the first image that like literally like traveled through your mind. Okay, hold on to that. I think that this room will have a little bit of different imagination due to where we are. But yeah, so like notice the image that came to your mind. Notice like the person's race, notice the person's gender, the class, the ethnic background, the conditions even, like, you know, like I often when I do this exercise, it's a lot about talking about just really understanding how like colonized our imagination is, right? Because you're prompt to visualize something, and the most common common vision that folks share with me is that they imagine a white man using a wheelchair, and this person tends to be tends to have like an expensive wheelchair, right? So in there, like boom, like our imagination, it's so colonized. Hopefully some other folks have different ideas, and it's always great to question what comes to our mind when we're asked to imagine, because it just tells you how colonized your imagination is. So starting with that, again, this is from my own insights doing the work. So just close it. So yeah, so I want to start talking about the creation of disability, how I've seen it in my work as an educator. Disability is created when people, when they find themselves outside of the limits of inclusion designated by folks with power. What does this mean? That you are disabled the minute you're not taking in consideration of how the space, the world, the institution is created, right? Like you're not born disabled, you're made disabled by the world. So the power of having resources, of having power to plan, to make decisions, and the notion of who should be included in an event, in an education program, in a country, in a building, at a party, in a dating app, you know, it's all shaped by the people that are in power, by their objectives, by their exposure and awareness to other people's needs, which is literally privilege, right? How privilege makes us, it's so hard to see beyond the privilege that we have. And that grants the power to exclude others from shaping the policies of inclusion and for literally building worlds. We talk so much about how different institutions, programs, spaces will look like if there was a diversity of needs that were in charge of the planning, of the creating, of the envisioning, of the imagining, of creating the priorities. So in this, I want to link it to education because I believe that ableism is so connected to the figure of bad student, right? Like, I don't know how many of folks present here that were ever told, oh, you're a bad student in different ways, right? Because you were late, or you weren't understanding something, or you had bad grades, or the way they were teaching something was just not getting to you. Or you weren't interested in topics. For example, it's not a coincidence that most of the folks that study computer science are white men. So I want to talk about bad student, right? So of being a bad student as me being a bad student. I think it's a great scapegoat. It really allows to shift the blame and to create a distraction from everything that's wrong in education systems, on everything that's wrong with how educators educate, and even how educators take care of themselves. It's really hard to educate, you know, like you really give it your all, you need time to rest. When you're educating, you give everything. And, you know, I've experienced like teachers that just give so much and they're depleted to the point where like they hate their students and they're just put in this place where they're in a toxic relationship with students because you have to be there and you used to love them, but you don't love them anymore. And it's also, it also helps with distracting what the priorities of education are. In this, you know, the bad students, you know, because they're bad students, well, they're not worthy of care. And well, they're bad, so this is why they didn't make it to the next year. Or well, they're bad, so they don't have to understand. It's really useful for the education system to have this figure. Often the comparison, right? Well, if, you know, white privileged boys in the class are doing great, then it's the problem of the bad students, you know? So again, it comes into use so often in education systems. It also allows for not having to question the goals of the system, right? Like why are we benefiting a certain type of student with a certain type of background, with a certain type of a specific way in which they learn is not questioned. And one of the things that makes bad students is not being compliant, right? And why it's so important for the school system to make us compliant and to make it known that a bad student is not compliant. Like, what are they preparing us for, right? It was one of the main things that we learn in school, to be compliant, to do as we're told, to not question, to excel, not ask too many questions, and there, you're a good student. And also, like me as a bad student, I just want to say that there's a lot of power in being a bad student, because you really see how people outside of the norm are not included, and you're questioning. You're constantly pushed outside, telling you that you're not performing correctly, and you really start seeing the holes in the system and why it's being a good student so important. And I want to connect it towards the importance of healing a relationship with learning and what are the goals of most of education systems, right? Specifically with a program that I created, teaching Indigenous youth. I will talk about it. So yeah, so the education system, it's plainly a tool of colonialism and the advancement of the empire. Indigenous children and youth were taken from their communities, their parents, their caregivers, and their traditional ways of learning, which had to do a lot with storytelling, hands-on learning activities, being on the land, and they were put in horrible conditions. Their hair was cut. There was a lot of abuse in different ways. They were not allowed to touch each other. They were not allowed to speak their language, and a lot of the trauma that exists today in Indigenous communities on Turtle Island, on the north of Turtle Island, has to do with this intergenerational trauma. And one of the tools of the empire was school. I was teaching. Children were taken to these schools, and the goal was to take the Indian out of the child, right? So seeing how education and empire were working together towards this, and this is everywhere. You can see it up till today in the Canadian education system, in the American education system. Why was it so important to take the Indian out of the child? Because that way it was going to be easier to disconnect Indigenous folks with the relationship with the land. And when Indigenous folks are in constant crisis, it's easier for the government to break treaties, to capture the land, resources, because people are just, trying to survive, healing from this horrible education. And how much damage he brought to the community is literally like learning destroyed communities. Well, learning. Yeah, so I created a program called Indigital. We did over 6 iterations online and across Canada. Most of the students were Indigenous. One of the things that we were told from the beginning is Indigenous youth are really hard to engage. You're not going to be able to do it. We figured out a way to do it. And also something that I want to share is like, when I was finally in front of students of 30, 40 little faces, for example, in Saskatchewan, one of the first times that I saw them, literally in that community, it was the last place where the residential school system had just closed. In 1996, I believe. So literally everyone, all the students that were there, their parents, their grandparents, and most of their caregivers were survivors from the system, right? And there I was bringing education to this community, and like whatever I said, I was just like, oh, here I have this power that other people have had before, and they really misuse it, right? So really, like sitting and understanding how much power we have as educators. And something that was very important for me was connecting with my bad student, what's it called? Yeah, my background in being a bad student, to like really connect with that, and to, have a lot of humility that I had a lot of power in that situation. A little bit about the program and what I understood in the process of what it had to be the focus on for a program of this nature to be successful. We only had BIPOC facilitators. We constantly told jokes. Indigenous folks in the North are constantly using humor, so we had to match that energy in the teaching and hanging out with them, and they kept coming back. We Indigenous folks in the North, there's so much trauma around food scarcity. Another way of the government taking over the land was depriving folks from their traditional foods, killing the buffalo, etc. So providing really good nutritional, abundant meals and having food all day for folks to come, providing childcare, transportation, to make sure that like most of their needs were taken care of, their children were safe, accessible, facilitators, inclusion of the children in activities as much as we could, and a lot of cultural learning, elders, knowledge keepers, providing a lot of time and doing a lot of activities with us. And folks reconnecting with their culture. Often, again, this education system that took so much from them, there was so much shame, and there's so much shame when folks come in there like, I'm Indigenous, but I don't know what that means, and like holding their hand through that and like through the shame of like, I don't know anything about my culture, yet I'm Indigenous. So yeah, so being really tender around that and like sharing a lot of experiences myself as well with a similar background. Also like the curriculum was alive. If today we really enjoyed something, or folks, because we're trying to pique their curiosity, right? Like, oh, let's talk about this, right? So then the next day you're like, oh yeah, I really wanna, like, I sensed it, like we sensed it like a specific way folks wanted to go, then we will pivot and talk about that. And really validating their thoughts and experiences, really listening. Yeah, so for example, a lot of the things that we taught had to do with coding and neuron technology. And, it wasn't about, oh, we're gonna teach, we're gonna learn what the white man's brilliance is. It's kind of like, oh, this is what technology, what they're doing now, like nowadays, it's kind of messed up. But also like, are people have been creating technology for thousands of years, and really like diving in that, and what did that mean? Because again, the self-esteem, the education system has really messed with people's self-esteem about their culture and their people never doing something good, never creating anything. Like they really made sure to erase that. So folks will only look up to white folks and their technology, when we know how many problems there are with this technology and how damaging it is, and we're seeing the consequences, right? And yeah, really working with the students to translate abstract programming concepts, which are really dry, really abstract, and like, oh my God, right? Like you're 5 minutes in and it's like, I don't know what this is. So to translate it into similar cultural teachings, for example, like beating and binary, and using only culturally relevant examples, just only, about, I don't know, like planning, functions around how to make an Indian taco, just whatever they were talking about, really like pivoting and understanding how to like reach them, and not be talking about, I don't know, like just things that it's not in their context, and they're gonna check out within minutes. Yeah, so I just want to talk a little bit about my path as an educator. So from this journey and figuring out how to teach successfully, how to think about how to engage folks and how to help folks through their healing journey with learning and education, as I'm doing mine. Yeah, I moved to Oaxaca, where my family's from, to really connect with folks on there. Because in the North, I really came to be close to Indigenous culture, and then coming back and being like, hey, like this is where my folks are from, and building relationships with lots of Indigenous artists, with farmers, traditional cooks, and just building, because I was thinking like, am I doing research? But research is like I'm peeking and I'm like, hey, what are you guys doing? No, I'm like building a relationship, right? And like just listening, and then that, bouncing with what I'm doing, and like with my journey, coming close to my people again, and coming back to everything that's healing in those lands. And also witnessing, one thing that I've been doing a lot is witnessing and understanding the tourism consumption of Oaxaca and like their people, like, and really like nailing down into that and seeing how there's so many folks that visit, so little money stays in Oaxacan hands, and figuring out how to make sure that that money stays on people's hands, right? Why? Because then folks don't have to migrate to the north, which is something that folks don't like. You know, folks want to, like, people come to visit Mexico because Mexico is great. The last thing like people from the south want to do is migrate to the north. It's often out of necessity. Yeah, and with all of that relation building, I'm designing courses around providing with digital skills in English to service providers, artists, and also developing apps to solve community problems like, for example, in small communities in Mexico, there's like little taxis that are communal taxis, and you often don't know when they pass by. So, you know, like figuring out how to build solutions for communities and really understanding what the problems are and working with them. So yeah, oh yeah. And another two things that I've really been learning, and it has to do, you know, like I go and I learn it and then I talk to my family and they're like, oh yeah, that's super important. Two concepts, Tequio and Guelaguetza. So Tequio, it's community it's the work that a community does when they come together to fix something. So let's say there's a forest fire, the community is like, oh, it's Tequio time, so we all have to band together and we have to fix it, right? It's not even like, oh, can you come and help? It's like, this is a way that communities in Oaxaca, it's ancestral, it's indigenous way of mutual aid. They come together, and there's so much brilliance in that. And Guelaguetza, you might heard of it as this very colorful party in Oaxaca, but actually something very deep. Like Guelaguetza is an indigenous ancestral way of borrowing and lending. So if I'm having a party and, you know, I'm getting married and I need, I don't know, 200 tortillas or tlayudas, then I ask them for the community, and then someone gives them to me. And then, I don't know, 10, 20 years on the road, 5 years, that person's gonna come to me and be like, hey, I need that Guelaguetza back. And it's not with interest. So I've been trying to do Guelaguetzas and receiving Guelaguetzas, and it's a really beautiful way of serving each other without any Western money involved. And that's one of the ways that I really see Oaxaca, like, you know, the essence. And when we really lean on each other in ways like that, yeah, it's really beautiful. So right now there's a picture on the screen of Minerva Lopez. She's a traditional Miche cook, and I've been learning a lot from her, you know, coming from that experience of creating and meeting indigenous folks in the north. And every time I talk to folks here, I'm like, oh, it's the same. It's the same culture. And I've been really learning about Guelaguetza in Tokyo with her. And that's a little bit about me, what I've been working on, and yeah, my journey as an educator and healing, yeah, my relationship with learning and teaching. I have a little studio called Milpa Studio, where I create a lot of different teaching experiences online and in person. That's my email, my Instagram, if you want to send me memes, and yeah. So thank you so much, Yushepeli, and I'll pass it to Chantal.
Thank you so much. I'm always so amazed at your work and this certain level of realness to it. Like when I think web, I always think like, oh, these sort of like augmented reality or whatever. And there's something just so useful, simple and useful. I was wondering, we can take about a 1 or 2 minute break for anybody who needs, and then we can meet back here in, I'll say 2 minutes, but yeah, let's say 2 minutes. So toilet break. I think we can come back slowly. As I just do a quick introduction to Smita. So Smita Chakraburtty is the founder of PAR, Prison Aid and Action Research. In 2015, the Bihar High Court commissioned her to inspect all 58 prisons in the state. The Supreme Court made it mandatory for all states to set up as many open prisons as possible based on the recommendations made in her report. Building on this work, Smita founded PAR to advocate for making open prisons a norm in India. Thank you so much for taking the time between your super busy nomadic lifestyle, going from state to state and city to city, working on this, to sit with us today to talk about your groundbreaking work, Smita. Over to you. You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to be speaking on prison. And yeah, it's the work that I do. It's sometimes it actually becomes very disturbing because for me to attend a talk or a webinar and where we're discussing ableism and knowing on principle, there's a law internationally exists in every country as incapacitation as a form of punishment, right? So and we speak about a society, a very advanced and progressive society. I'm speaking from India, and we are the world's largest democracy. But here, even in the democracy, we seem to be perfectly fine, okay, with caging our fellow citizens, right? So, so let me get to the point where this, the prison structures in this country or in our neighboring countries or internationally, whatever the structure that you see of a prison, the prison architecture is actually created as it's a cage structure. So so prison is an institution that is created based on power, and it's all about power and control of space and time and incapacitating an individual. So, it's like incapacitation as a form of punishment. Like you stay under bar fetters, you stay inside a cage, you are so it's used as I often use this concept of a prey and a predator, where the prisoner is the prey of the prison as an institution, you see. And through this through this absolute control of space and time, the prison institution closes on that individual. And as a society, when prison is a very common institution, no matter how invisible it is, but it is present in every country, in every state, every society. Now, so essentially, we are very comfortable with caging people. We are very comfortable as a society, imposing incapacitation of another fellow human being. And somehow justice is defined by this concept. So yeah, in an ableist society, I think the incapacitation is a form of punishment. It's a popular form of punishment. So this is the norm everywhere. And then when we talk about open prisons, it's an absolutely different institution. It's where you're talking about prisoners having agency, where you're talking about prisoners having right to liberty, dignity, equality, all these very big notions of individual freedom and say even social responsibility. It all is imposed through, I mean, it can be can be inflicted through the system of open prisons, because conventionally speaking, every time an individual is convicted, we are actually acquitting the society from all the responsibilities, because I think crime is inherent in a society. Nobody is like born a criminal, and this is a cliche that is used everywhere, that nobody is born a criminal. And and there is an institutional bias, there is an institutional discrimination which always operates on who is the prisoner. If we understand the inmate of, or who is the prisoner in our society, it is basically people coming from marginalized communities, people coming from disadvantaged disadvantaged part of the society. So, and there, that entire concept of ableism operates through this operation, operates through structurally imposing incapacitation, through isolation, through further marginalizing the individual. And then it operates on that concept of taboo, because prison is a taboo. So whether you're entering prison and then coming out acquitted doesn't really matter. Once you're inside a prison, you will always be suffering from the social taboo. Now, this is a common construct, and prisons are also, because it's a cage structure, so one can imagine, at least in Indian prisons, an individual is kept inside a cage or a cage structure, which is called a barrack or a ward, for more than 15 hours a day. And these barracks are usually overcrowded institutions. So the average overcrowding percentage in the country is 150%. So one can imagine. So your space and time is absolutely constrained when people like humans are kept like smuggled animals. It's very disturbing to see that on a regular basis, and it's a common practice. It's a norm. So people don't feel disturbed seeing a prison. And so we're basically saying that we are okay seeing another human being in a cage. So this is the principal premise on which I started working, and my journey was that, because when I walked inside the prison, when I met prisoners, I didn't see anything different from what I meet on a regular basis, people outside. And prisoners are not the monsters that they are made to be. If I simplify the concept, and it's not, it can't be defined in black and white of when somebody went to prison, what was the crime, what is the nature of offense, and all these blanket terms that we start using, sexual offenders, or say people, drug abuse, and those terms, and we can't use it. It generally gets used in a blanket, as a blanket terminology, right? So because every case of offense, or every case file that we study, it is based on individual case studies. The circumstances are different of every incident of crime. And again, I've been talking about this for a very long time, and the journey is to remove even if there was really an incident of crime, one should start seeing crime as an incident, right? Which does not define an individual. An individual is far removed from a crime. A crime is an incident. Let's say it's like momentary lapse of judgment, and an offense has happened without the intent of it. So majority of the prisoners we see in prison, who are there in Indian prisons at least, majority of them, 99% of them, are people who are not habitual offenders. They are one-time offenders. They have no criminal antecedent. They have perpetrated an offense, if at all, then it was perpetrated, the offense is circumstantial. And again, the reason behind incarceration or a conviction is basically the entire criminal justice system, the checkered maze of criminal justice system. It's very, very it's every stage of the criminal justice system suffers from that institutional bias, and there is the concept of like so that's where the concept of like say long sentences, life sentencing, like you remove the person from society for life, but that doesn't actually affect, it doesn't heal the society at all, you see. So yeah, so it's a colonial construct, obviously. So we still have, like, in a post-colonial state structure, we still have medieval laws which govern the criminal justice system, and yeah, so all the different concepts of society comes in over here. Now, the screen actually invites me to speak about open prison. When we talk about breaking the glass ceiling. So when I first saw this open prison, it was my first impression of an open prison was this, that these are prisons without bars. So the entire structure, the institutional, the structure of incapacitating an individual, keeping a person in a cage, that entire thing is completely disrupted by an open prison system. This is a prison system which is a prison without bars. There are prisons where there are no prison guards as well, and these are people who are convicted prisoners. They stay with their families inside the open prison. The families are not treated as prisoners at all. And these are people who stay over there. They go out in the morning, they come back in the evening, they have their own choice of livelihood, they have their own uh, uh, choice of livelihood. Then there are schools inside these open prisons, and these schools were initially created for prisoner children to go to the school, but people from the locality also come and study and stay in this, study in these schools. Now, the open prison system is it's what can I say? It's something. I won't call it a rehabilitative system, but it's like giving the individual the right to equality and dignity. So you're facilitating somebody's reintegration within the society, that that the isolation that the prison had imposed, so that goes away from that open prison system. And this also brings in it also removes the taboo which is there on prison, because taboo is a very important aspect of the criminal justice system and the prison system. Prison as an institution is a taboo, so it actually removes that social stigma and taboo, and it also humanizes the prisoner, the inmate. The entire concept of seeing an inmate as this as a monster, othering the inmate. Over here, it's an inclusive system. So open prison system works in a way that prisoners go out of the prison, their families, they stay in the prison, their families go out of the prison, definitely, because there's no restriction on the family members. And not only do the prisoners go out of the prison, the people from the society also come inside the prison. So there was this one prisoner who was a doctor, and he had his doctor's chamber inside the open prison. And after, say, in the evening, the prisoner is not allowed to go out. So people from the locality would come to see the doctor inside the prison. So that is how that social reintegration happens, like where both the prisoner can go out of the prison and both the society people from outside can come inside the prison. And that's why, and in these prisons, the guards, the prison guards, they don't wear uniform, because the prisoner children, the children who stay inside these prisons, they don't know that they're inside a prison, right? So if the guard wears uniform, the children might get intimidated. So they don't wear uniform. And that's why the term prison is not used in these cases, So they are called open camps. So Sanganer open camp, they don't use the word prison over there because, of course, because of the children staying over there inside the prison, they don't want them to know that they're inside prison. So I thought this is a beautiful concept. And in this state like Rajasthan, which is an extreme western part of India, which is a desert, doesn't have water, the extreme climatic condition, but it has this beautiful prison system where there are more than 42 such prisons, and this is the largest open prison system in the world. and the highest number of people stay in these open prisons. And yes, the Supreme Court had ordered, when I saw this prison system, I wrote my report, I spoke to hundreds of prisoners and interviewed them, studied their cases. And when the court saw this, the court was also baffled. At the apex court of the country, also, I'm extremely lucky that the court accepted my recommendations. And so we are on this mission, like making open prison a norm in this country. Like, I would like to abolish the traditional prison systems completely. And because it's a redundant system, you can't bring in any change and you can't, it's just inflicting, it's an extremely violent system. Prison is it just inflicts more violence. It's structural violence. I mean, that every time I talk about prison, I talk about a cage. And I just don't understand. As a practitioner, as an activist, I don't feel comfortable seeing another person in a cage. We can't be comfortable seeing people in a cage. So yes, the open prison system actually works opposite to it, because when you're talking about, say, when there is crime, we're talking about crime and punishment, there's another aspect of crime is the victim comes, like the victim is involved. So every time we speak about open prisons, there is this whataboutery that we face because you can say, what about the victim? But you see, providing a humane alternative to a traditional prison structure is not against victim rights at all, you see. And it actually creates this space for restorative form of justice. It also creates this space for restorative, definitely reintegration within the society of the prisoner. Definitely, it operates as a it's a very democratic way of dealing with crime, a humane way of dealing with crime. And there's this concept, open prison can also support truth and reconciliation, you see. So, yeah, so I think we talk about ableism, and we definitely, ableism is definitely there, and it's not only restricted to say physical, like people with disability, or ableism is not only restricted to, but these are these institutional structural constructs and the social constructs which is there. Because if ableism is not is not glorified, then we don't have incapacitation as a form of punishment, because it's an official, it's there. This is a form of punishment where a person has to be kept in a cage. It's incapacitating an individual because you are inflicting the ableism of the society and then victimizing certain, like you select some people from disadvantaged communities and it's like blame shifting. It's like, so you put one person inside prison and you say that the person is a sexual offender, no matter what the real circumstances are, because the person probably never had an opportunity, because criminal defense is a very expensive process. You cannot afford to have most people can't afford to have a good criminal, like a legal defense, a lawyer. And the person goes behind bars, and the society inflicts, so we have eradicated, say, a sexual offender from the society. So we are not against the sexual offense, but the offender is then used as a symbol. So there, you see it as retribution, and then you see it as a deterrence, and it actually doesn't work. And I don't know, I mean, for centuries, it's not working for centuries. We all know prisons are dysfunctional, but somehow it's still there. I hope in my lifetime, and with all my colleagues and all the researchers we work with, I just hope that we make some progress. That's it.
Thank you so much. That's a lot already. I think we can move straight into questions. And if anybody wants to take a break, you can just comfortably do that on your own. I know that there was already a question in the chat for Yuvia, and then we can also open it up for anybody to send questions over to Smita. I know that a few housekeeping. Please make sure that you choose your language in interpretation. Otherwise, if you need translations, people need to hear my translations in order to understand that. But I know that Luz Angela has been putting that into the chat. So in order to hear your language, please choose that. Also, if you want to ask questions, you can either just use the reactions at the bottom, the emojis, or you could put it into the chat. If you really want to, you can just jump in and use your voice. I think we're an intimate enough room to do that. So no formalities. Okay, so the first question that was in the chat was, it's wonderful to see programs like Indigital as an alternative to colonial education. I'm also wondering how we can challenge the effects of standard education on white folks and others with privilege, which teaches them to perpetuate colonialism and capitalism and power inequity. How do we deprogram people with power who have gone through this education? And how do we prevent white kids from becoming servants of capitalism and colonialism? I think that was directed to Yuvia, but if Smita also wants to respond, then we can do that.
Yeah, I think it has to do a lot with what kids are taught, or what to, like, their power of the imagination and where they're taught to desire. Also, it's really important, even talking about white people, like the idea of white people became white, like white people, every white person like has a culture and is indigenous to some land. And in the process of becoming white, one of the reasons why there's so much violence and like oppression to others is white folks have to remember who they are. Who were you before you became white? And like there's like folks all over Europe have and used to have big and deep connections with the land, the culture, the language. So it's I think the process of white people remembering who they are before they became white is the beginning to any change happening. You cannot go into other culture. Like, I'm sure in your culture, in the specific culture, there's something around education and teaching that is worth rescuing there. Yeah, just want to say that.
Okay, thank you. So there's, I will put down, sorry, just trying to copy and paste a bit.
Maybe we can ask people to ask their questions.
Yeah, I mean, if people are comfortable, I just know that we're recording this, so if people are not comfortable, I don't want to, but if people are comfortable, please feel free to show yourself on video and ask, or I can read it. Yeah. So Smita, thank you so much for sharing this important work you've been doing regarding systems that disable. I may have missed it due to spotty Wi-Fi, but I'm wondering if you can share other countries you see doing parallel restructuring of carceral systems. Also, how were these shifts to open prisons seeded? And then another question is, do you track, so there's a few here, do you track how people are doing once they are released from open prisons or back in society? Are any studies done available about how well these people reintegrate? So one is
Also-
about parallel restructuring carceral systems, and the other is about tracking how well people are doing once they reintegrate.
Yeah, so the thing is, the moment the person is sent into an open prison, so this is like, you have to see it to believe it. Like it's a community living. It's like a village. It doesn't have any walls. It doesn't have any bar. It's just like it's community living where prisoners, they stay with their families. They most of these prisons are governed by prisoners. Like they're managed by prisoners themselves. So there are prisoner governing bodies who operates these prisons. So the government does not pay for fooding or medicine, or does not control the lives of the individuals in any which way. They are completely, I mean, so this is the concept of graded liberty. It is built on the principle of trust. It's a trust-based system. It does not inflict violence at all. So the study we studied rate of recidivism in prison. Recidivism means reoffending. So in open prisons, hardly anybody reoffended. So there were people who are also habitual offenders in a closed prison. And when they were shifted to an open prison, there was no, so the rate of recidivism or prisoners reoffending is negligible in an open prison. And that is purely because like liberty is such a precious, like human dignity and the concept of liberty. If liberty is used as an incentive for rehabilitation. And again, I want to go back to this concept and just saying that majority of the people who are in prison are not really criminals. They are there because of their circumstances, because of institutional bias, because they couldn't afford a good legal defense, and they just happen to be convicted. And so that way, I mean, reoffending is not really a problem. So rate of recidivism is negligible if that responds to the query of what happens or how well have they reintegrated within the society. So this actually resolves that problem, because to stay in an open prison, you have to earn your living or you have to support your family. I mean, it's like a normal. I mean, I won't use the word normal, but I would say like any individual in a society is they're just like an inmate is just like all of us. They're not different from us. And the concept of open prison originated from the principle of trust, from the principle of non-violence, because during the Indian freedom movement, there were Gandhians, Mahatma Gandhi being one of the major thinkers of and supporters of non-violence. So these Gandhians, they were arrested and kept behind bars when they were like fighting for freedom in India, which is not very many years ago. So when they were in prison, they realized that it's a colonial structure, and prisons were created by the Britishers in this country to control dissent. So when they thought that after Indian independence, when they formed the first government, they wanted to have something which actually is progressive. But of course, so this was like a stray experiment which happened in 1953. Immediately, couple of years, Indian independence is 1947. So within like say 5-6 years of independence, this concept of open prison was floated, and it still exists. It's a system that stood the test of time, but I mean, you see, the surprising part is that nobody knew about this system. Even the Supreme Court didn't know about it. So I just happened to come across a prison, and I didn't know that. I mean, I'm a prison researcher. I study prisons. I professionally do that. I even didn't know about it. So it was an invisible system, but it's a successful experiment, and now we're trying to propagate it. We're trying to advocate it, like scale up the entire concept. I mean, from one state, we want to move it across the whole country, and the major part of our work is like to speak about open prison and speak to prisoners and get prisoners to speak about their lives to people, so that this outreach exercise is done. People understand, and yeah, so that's a major part of our work, apart from legal research and going to the court and convincing and trying to change laws which inflict incapacitation of individuals. Does that respond?
Yeah, thank you. Yuvia, do you have thoughts about how these Indigenous practices can transform the colonial premises of educational structures without extraction or co-option, or efforts to decolonize institutions, whether schools or prisons, only a transitional temporal phase of a movement and should not be considered ends in themselves?
Okay, so one time I was in a workshop and I was in a group where we basically had to, we were told that we had to create like an education system for Toronto that would be different. And that's when it really hit me. I was like, we don't need to create anything. Systems, like educational systems from Indigenous folks in Toronto or Takarano, like they exist already. Like it's not so much about decolonized institution, it's about giving those funds and that time for Indigenous folks in whatever location to create and to bring back their own programs of education. And I feel like we spend a lot of time decolonizing. It's kind of like, you know, that meme of like mopping the ocean, and it's like, oh, I've been doing so much, but like nothing really, it's just so hard. It's like, how do you make water dry? I think it's, again, it's about giving the leadership, resources, space for Indigenous folks everywhere to create these programs.
I have a question, just because this session was talking about physical and digital spaces, and I do want to ask what, and I guess for Yuvia's as well, I was really looking at sort of the digital and why you're interested in using why are you teaching programming of all things? You could just, you know, there are different forms of technology. Why is that particular of use? So I guess in both questions, what is that sort of form of architecture and that kind of space, whether it's virtual or physical, what does that have to do with, I mean, how does that connect to this form of ableism?
One thing, it's one of the easiest ways to get funding, because everyone wants to create programs around STEM, and it's really lovely, right? But when you talk about cultural practices, most institutions or grants are like, you know what, we need technology workers. You know, most folks are looking for like cheap programmers, so it's a way to like hack the system. Get that funding. I mean, again, like it's not that it's not interesting, it's useful. It's also like a way for folks to start getting interested in things like this. It all has to start with like, it's not that you're learning the white man, like our people have created technology for thousands of years. And that there's no representation of Indigenous folks in technology. So often we also get tools, apps, websites that are not built by us with our understanding of the problems that we have. Like there's a startup in Canada right now that are working on an easy way to renew status cards. So, you know, there was a problem that was understood. And it's a start to people that create technology shape the world. And it's important that Indigenous folks, you know, again, it's just so hard to get there. The school system tells you don't belong here from middle school. You're Indigenous, you're thinking of being a computer programmer? Like, no, like, right? So it's a constant. It's just like these programs are to really like nurture your spirit and to work on your self-esteem, that, yeah, like it is possible to create these things. And it does take a while, because again, the curriculum is so abstract, it's so dreadful, it's so that it's a lot of work to like translate it into something that it's, you know, accessible. It's not that it's hard, it's just that it's so like even, I don't know, folks being like, oh, I don't come in my code. It's basically like, I don't want anyone to know, like, this is so like, you know, it's like the power of a cartel of dentists, you know, like why it's so expensive? Because only few people know how to do it, and they make sure to put barriers in there so it's not accessible, and it costs a lot of money and few people can access it. And again, we need so many solutions for for Indigenous communities around technology, and to also like, with the connection to the land, to bring different perspectives about how technology and computers should be. Like a computer screen doesn't make a lot of sense. We only have a pair of eyes, right? So imagining different things. There's few people involved in current technology. We need to expand that. So again, yeah, it's because funding, it gets you there, and because it's really important. There's a lot of work to do, but yeah, it's super important for Indigenous folks to be involved in that. That's fear.
It actually sounds pretty outrageous. Which is good. I mean, I said it, I meant in a good way.
I think we have time for one last question.
I want to come in here a little bit because the previous question, which was for me, it had a thing like whether other countries have the concept of open prison. You see, Scandinavian countries, they have open prison. They don't have prisons at all at this point in time. They've eradicated prison systems completely. But I would say that the prison in Norway, or the prison, the Scandinavian or the European open prison system, it's actually pretty sanitized system. So it's another way of inflicting ableism. Like, so the prisoner is kept in an open prison. There are like 10 people staying like a boarding school kind of a thing. They're educated. There's a gym. It's like a school, right? So you have to behave in a certain way to stay in that open prison, and you have to act according to the norms which are dictated to you. So the Indian open prison system is a very organic system. I think that is something that we need to talk about, and that's why it sounds a little crazy, because being an Indian, saying that European prison system is not up to the mark is not accepted. Yeah, so I think if people know about this open prison, and it would be nice just to generate awareness and to an alternative, which is also there. It's a successful alternative.
Thank you so much. If there's no final questions, then at 6:15, and I want to let everybody go on time. I'm just trying to, on my script, I know that there's a reminder I'm supposed to give. To subscribe to the Afield mailing list so that you can keep up to date on different initiative and opportunities. Thank you so much, Yuvia and Smita, from calling in. I'm just amazed at the geography of these conversations and how disruptive that in itself is. And we kind of touched on so many things that I've been trying to bring together, from architecture to different types of what space even means and how we can conceive of it. Smita, you kind of said these spaces control both time and space and time is prisons. And when you don't have that liberty of inventing this or thinking creatively around the space around you, how that is so incapacitating. But also we kind of touched on different forms of technologies from histories, which is another thing that is something that I want to explore from different belief systems, and how we can try to turn that into a conversation around ableism and empowerment as well. The belief systems that have, and many of them that have been silenced, in fact. That's it. Thank you so much for taking time from different times around the world right now. And for everybody who has stayed on, I know that it's late in some parts and it's early in other parts. So the next session is on the 6th. It's on Monday, same time, 11 a.m. And we used Eastern time, which I don't know, that's debatable whether we should be using that as a standard time, but we used that. 11 a.m. time in New York. If you want to join. And next one will be Renata and Samuel will be speaking in from Sao Paulo and Cuba and Havana. It's going to be amazing. And yeah, I hope everyone will join. Thank you so much for joining today. If you have any other further questions, you can also email it to us, and then we can also send it through to Smita and to Yuvia. I think Abby's email is abby@council.art.
Yeah, can you also
Afield.art.
share the open prison voices from Instagram?
We will share that. I think that's all of that is actually in the participation guide, but we can send that through again.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.